The perfect deception. The secretary who believed in love. Elena Martinez stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Sterling Enterprises executive suite, watching the Manhattan skyline glow in the evening light. At 28 years old, she had worked her way from a community college graduate to the executive secretary of one of New York's most powerful CEOs. Her journey had been built on hard work, late nights, and an unwavering belief that dedication would be rewarded. "You're still here," a deep voice said behind her. Elena turned to see Alexander Sterling, the man who had occupied her thoughts for the past 2 years. At 35, Alexander was everything the magazines said he was: brilliant, handsome, and utterly captivating. His dark hair was slightly disheveled from running his hands through it, a habit she had learned meant he was stressed. "I wanted to finish the quarterly reports," Elena said softly. "The board meeting is tomorrow." Alexander crossed the room, his expensive shoes silent on the marble floor. He stood behind her, close enough that she could feel his warmth. "You work too hard, Elena." "I learned from the best," she replied, allowing herself a small smile. The secret romance. Their relationship had begun 6 months ago, though Elena had been in love with him much longer. It started with late nights working on a crucial merger, shared takeout dinners, and conversations that went beyond business. Alexander had confided in her about his difficult childhood, his demanding father, and his dreams of building something meaningful. "My father built this company on ruthlessness," Alexander had told her one night. "I want to build it on innovation and integrity. With you by my side, Elena, I know I can." Those words had melted her heart. Here was a man who saw her not just as an employee, but as a partner, someone who valued her mind as much as anything else. "Elena," Alexander said now, turning her gently to face him, "I need to talk to you about something important." Her heart raced. They had kept their relationship secret at his insistence. "The company isn't ready to see their CEO with his secretary," he had explained. "They won't take you seriously. Let's wait until I can promote you to vice president. Then we can announce our engagement properly." Engagement. The word still made her dizzy with happiness. "What is it?" she asked. Alexander pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. Elena's breath caught. This was the moment she had dreamed about since she was a little girl growing up in Queens, sharing a tiny apartment with her single mother who cleaned offices to pay the bills. "Elena Martinez," Alexander began, opening the box to reveal a stunning diamond ring. "You are the most remarkable woman I have ever met. Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down her face as she threw her arms around him. "Yes, yes, of course." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Elena felt like the luckiest woman in the world. She didn't notice the coldness in his eyes or the calculating way he smiled. The storm approaches. The next 3 weeks were a blur of happiness for Elena. She wore the engagement ring on a chain around her neck, hidden beneath her blouse at work. Alexander promised they would announce everything after the upcoming acquisition of Meridian Technologies was finalized. "This deal will change everything," he told her. "Sterling Enterprises will double in value. Then I can make you vice president, and we can announce our engagement. I want to give you everything you deserve, Elena." She believed him. She believed every word. Elena threw herself into work with renewed energy. She managed Alexander's schedule, coordinated with investors, and prepared presentations. She also began noticing irregularities in some of the financial documents that crossed her desk. "Alexander," she said one evening, "I found some discrepancies in the Meridian acquisition files. Some of the money trails don't add up." His expression didn't change. "What kind of discrepancies?" "It looks like funds are being moved through offshore accounts, and some of the asset valuations seem inflated." She showed him her notes, detailed and thorough as always. "I think someone might be trying to embezzle money or manipulate the deal." Alexander studied her notes carefully. "This is serious, Elena. Very serious. I need you to do something for me." "Anything," she said without hesitation. "I need you to sign some authorization forms. As my fiancé and soon-to-be VP, I want you to have official oversight on these accounts. That way, you can help me investigate properly without raising alarms." Elena hesitated. "Shouldn't we involve the legal team?" "No," Alexander said firmly, then softened his tone. "Not yet. If there's corruption, it might involve people in the company. I need someone I can trust absolutely. That's you, Elena. You're the only person I trust." His words warmed her heart. She signed the documents, dozens of them, trusting the man she loved. The trap closes. 2 weeks later, Elena arrived at work to find the building surrounded by police cars and federal agents. Her heart hammered as she pushed through the crowd of employees gathering in the lobby. Ms. Martinez, a stern-faced woman in a dark suit, approached her. "I'm Agent Sarah Chun with the FBI. We need you to come with us." "What? Why? What's happening?" "You're being arrested for embezzlement, wire fraud, and securities manipulation involving Sterling Enterprises and the Meridian Technologies acquisition." Elena's world tilted. "There must be a mistake. I didn't. We have your signatures on multiple authorization documents. We've traced over $50 million that you moved through offshore accounts. You have the right to remain silent." As the agent read her rights, Elena saw Alexander emerge from the elevator. Their eyes met across the lobby. She expected to see confusion, shock, or support. Instead, she saw something that made her blood run cold: satisfaction. "Alexander," she called out. Tell them this is a mistake." He walked toward her slowly, his expression grave. Media cameras were suddenly everywhere, reporters shouting questions. Alexander raised his hand for silence. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying authority. "Today is a sad day for Sterling Enterprises. I have just learned that my executive secretary, Elena Martinez, has been systematically stealing from this company and manipulating our acquisition of Meridian Technologies for personal gain." "No." Elena struggled against the agents holding her arms. "Alexander, please. I love you. We're engaged." A ripple of shocked whispers went through the crowd. Alexander's expression showed perfect surprise. He reached into his pocket and pulled out what looked like a small recording device. "Ms. Martinez has been making increasingly disturbing claims about a supposed romantic relationship between us. I've been documenting these delusions on advice from HR, concerned for her mental state." Elena felt the world crumbling beneath her feet. "I never imagined it would go this far," Alexander continued, his voice heavy with false regret. "Ms. Martinez was a trusted employee. I gave her responsibilities perhaps beyond her capabilities, and she abused that trust. Sterling Enterprises will cooperate fully with federal investigators to recover the stolen funds." "You're lying," Elena screamed. "You gave me that ring. You told me to sign those papers. This is your fraud, not mine." Alexander turned to the cameras with a sad smile. "As you can hear, Ms. Martinez is clearly experiencing a mental health crisis. I hope she gets the help she needs. But the evidence is clear. Her signatures are on every document. The money went to accounts in her name." As agents led Elena away in handcuffs, she saw Alexander's assistant, a young woman named Rebecca who had always seemed cold toward Elena, step forward to comfort him. The way he put his arm around Rebecca, the familiar way she leaned into him, told Elena everything she needed to know. She had been nothing but a pawn, a patsy, a convenient scapegoat for Alexander's crimes. The trial was swift and brutal. Elena's court-appointed lawyer was overworked and underpaid. The evidence against her was overwhelming. Her signatures on dozens of documents authorizing fraudulent transfers, accounts bearing her name containing portions of the stolen money, emails from her computer detailing the scheme. "It's all fabricated," Elena insisted to her lawyer. "He set me up. The engagement ring, the relationship, all of it was designed to make me trust him enough to sign those documents." "Do you have proof of this relationship?" her lawyer asked wearily. "The ring. He gave me an engagement ring. Ms. Martinez, we searched your apartment. There was no ring." Elena's blood ran cold. Of course, Alexander must have taken it back that night when she had left her apartment to get them dinner. She had been so happy, so trusting. She hadn't noticed him going through her things. "What about my phone? There must be texts, calls." "Your phone records show primarily work-related communication with Mr. Sterling. A few personal exchanges, but nothing indicating a romantic relationship. Certainly nothing that a CEO might not send to a trusted secretary." Elena realized with growing horror how carefully Alexander had planned everything. He had insisted they communicate about their relationship only in person, never through text or email. "For privacy," he had said. "I don't want some hacker getting hold of our intimate conversations." Every romantic moment, every promise, every tender word had been spoken in private with no witnesses. The few times they had been intimate, it had been at his private cabin upstate. a property owned through an LLC that probably couldn't be traced back to him. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. As the judge sentenced her to 15 years in federal prison, Elena looked across the courtroom at Alexander Sterling. He sat in the gallery, his expression appropriately solemn, with Rebecca now openly beside him wearing what looked suspiciously like an engagement ring of her own. Their eyes met one final time. He smiled, a small, private smile meant only for her. A smile that said, "I won. The prison and the promise." Elena spent her first night in federal prison curled on a thin mattress, crying until she had no tears left. She had lost everything. Her career, her reputation, her freedom, her savings, which had been seized to pay restitution, and worst of all, her faith in love. But as the weeks passed and the initial shock faded, something else began to grow inside her. Not despair, but cold, crystalline fury. In the prison library, Elena read everything she could about corporate fraud, securities law, and computer forensics. She volunteered for every educational program available. She wrote letters to lawyers, journalists, and investigators, trying to find someone who would listen to her story. No one did. Alexander Sterling was too powerful, too connected, and too careful. 2 months into her sentence, Elena discovered she was pregnant. The prison doctor confirmed it, 6 weeks along. The baby had been conceived that night after Alexander proposed, when Elena had been deliriously happy and he had been consummating the final phase of his betrayal. Elena sat in the medical office, her hand on her still flat stomach, and made a decision. This child would never know her father as anything but the monster he truly was. And somehow, some way, Elena would survive this. She would get out. She would clear her name. And she would destroy Alexander Sterling the same way he had destroyed her. Methodically, legally, and without mercy. The revelation. 3 days later, Elena's lawyer made a surprise visit. He looked uncomfortable as he sat across from her in the visitation room. "Ms. Martinez, I have news. There's been a development in your case." Elena's heart leaped. "Someone believes me?" "Not exactly. But..." He slid a document across the table. "The federal investigator found some additional evidence. It doesn't exonerate you, but it shows that Alexander Sterling was more involved in the scheme than he claimed." Elena scanned the document quickly. Her legal training from her paralegal classes kicked in. "This shows he authorized some of the transfers himself." "Yes, but his lawyers claim he was deceived by you, that you presented false information to get his signatures." "Of course they do." Elena's voice was bitter. "However," the lawyer continued, "there's a possibility for a plea deal. If you agree to testify about Mr. Sterling's involvement, they might reduce your sentence." "Testify to what? I'm the one who got convicted. My testimony is worthless now. Not if you can provide specific details about how he manipulated you. The investigators are starting to suspect there were other victims. If they can establish a pattern." Elena's mind raced. A plea deal might mean she could be out in 5 years instead of 15. Her child would only be 5 years old. She would still have time to be a mother, to rebuild their life. But 5 years was still 5 years of her child growing up without her. "I'll do it," she said. "I'll tell them everything." The lawyer nodded, gathering his papers. As he stood to leave, Elena called out, "Wait. I need you to do something else for me." "What's that?" "I need you to set up a trust fund. There's some money in my old savings account that wasn't seized, about $5,000. It's not much, but I want it invested for my baby. And I want to establish a company." The lawyer frowned. "Ms. Martinez, you can't run a company from prison." "I know, but I can own one. I want to call it Phoenix Rising Consulting. I want it registered and legal. Can you do that?" "I suppose, but why?" Elena placed her hand on her stomach, where her daughter was growing. "Because one day, I'm going to rise from these ashes. And when I do, I'm going to have everything ready." The lawyer left shaking his head at what he assumed was the delusion of a desperate woman. But Elena Martinez had never been more clear-headed in her life. Alexander Sterling had made one crucial mistake. He had underestimated her. He had seen her as weak, trusting, and easy to manipulate. He had been right about the trusting part. But Elena's trust, once broken, would never be given again. And weakness? Elena was about to prove that steel was forged in fire. As she was escorted back to her cell, Elena made a silent promise to her unborn daughter and to herself. She would survive this. She would become stronger, smarter, and more powerful than Alexander Sterling had ever imagined. And when the time came for their next meeting, Elena would no longer be the naive secretary who believed in love. She would be his reckoning. 3 years later, the new woman. The Seattle rain drummed against the windows of the modern high-rise office as Elena Rhodes reviewed the financial reports on her screen. She smiled at the numbers. Phoenix Rising Consulting had grown from a prison dream into a multi-million-dollar tech consulting firm specializing in corporate security and fraud detection. The irony wasn't lost on her. Elena stood and walked to the window, her reflection showing a woman transformed. Gone was the timid secretary who had believed in fairy tales. At 31, Elena had cut her long dark hair into a sleek bob, traded her modest clothing for designer power suits, and learned to carry herself with the confidence of someone who had lost everything and rebuilt it from scratch. "Mommy," a small voice called from the doorway. Elena turned to see her daughter Sophia running toward her, followed by Maria, their nanny. At 3 years old, Sophia had Elena's dark eyes and determination, though thankfully she had inherited none of her father's cruelty. "My little love," Elena swept Sophia into her arms. "Did you have fun at the park?" "We saw ducks, and I counted them. There were 7, Sophia announced proudly. 7? That's wonderful." Elena kissed her daughter's forehead, breathing in the sweet scent of baby shampoo and innocence. Sophia was the reason Elena had survived. During those dark days in prison, when other inmates had tried to break her spirit, when the weight of injustice had threatened to crush her, Elena had thought of her daughter. She had served 3 years of her sentence before the plea deal finally went through, earning early release for cooperation and good behavior. 3 years of missing Sophia's first steps, first words, first everything. Maria, her mother's best friend, had cared for Sophia during that time, bringing her for visits that broke Elena's heart and kept it beating simultaneously. The master plan. After Sophia was put down for her afternoon nap, Elena returned to her office where her business partner and best friend, David Shunn, was waiting. David was a former FBI forensic accountant who had become disillusioned with the system after seeing too many guilty rich people walk free while people like Elena suffered. "The information you wanted." David slid a thick folder across her desk. "Sterling Enterprises is in serious trouble." Elena opened the folder, her expression neutral despite the satisfaction burning in her chest. "Tell me everything." After the Meridian acquisition, Alexander expanded too aggressively. He made enemies in the tech sector by using the same fraud tactics he used with Meridian: inflated valuations, offshore manipulation, scapegoating employees. But this time, people started asking questions. David pulled out financial charts. "Sterling Enterprises stock has dropped 40% in the last year. 3 major investors pulled out. The SEC has been investigating, but as usual, Alexander has enough lawyers and connections to delay everything." "And now?" Elena asked. "Now he's desperate for capital. He's looking for investors willing to buy into the company to keep it afloat. The board is pressuring him to accept new partners or face a hostile takeover." Elena leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled. For 3 years, she had been planning this moment. While in prison, she had studied every aspect of corporate law, finance, and strategic business warfare. After her release, she had used her $5,000 and her mother's life insurance money to start Phoenix Rising. She had worked 20-hour days, taken on every consulting job she could find, and invested every penny wisely. She had built a reputation as the consultant who could find fraud that others missed, because she had been framed for it herself. Companies paid her top dollar to audit their systems and protect them from people like Alexander Sterling. And all the while, she had been tracking him, learning his business patterns, his weaknesses, his secrets. "I want to buy in," Elena said quietly. David's eyes widened. "Elena, are you sure? If he recognizes you." "He won't." Elena pulled out a mirror and studied her reflection. The woman looking back was nothing like the soft, trusting secretary Alexander had known. Elena Martinez died in prison. Elena Rhodes is someone entirely different. The return to New York. 2 weeks later, Elena stood in the lobby of Sterling Enterprises for the first time in over 3 years. Her heart pounded, but her face remained calm and composed. The building had changed. Where there had once been fresh flowers and modern art, there were now empty spaces and worn furniture. The company was dying, and it showed. Ms. Rhodes, a young man in an ill-fitting suit approached. Mr. Sterling will see you now. Elena followed him to the elevator, each floor bringing back memories she had carefully locked away. The executive suite where Alexander had proposed. The conference room where she had worked countless late nights. The office where her life had been destroyed. The elevator doors opened directly into Alexander's office. And there he was. Alexander Sterling stood by the same floor-to-ceiling windows where Elena had once stood as his secretary. He turned as she entered, and Elena felt a moment of savage satisfaction at what she saw. He had aged. Not just 3 years older, but worn down. There were lines around his eyes, gray threading through his dark hair, and a tightness to his mouth that spoke of stress and pressure. Ms. Rhodes, he said, extending his hand. Thank you for coming. Elena shook his hand firmly, meeting his eyes without flinching. Mr. Sterling, I've heard interesting things about Sterling Enterprises. If he recognized her, he showed no sign. Why would he? Elena Martinez had been soft-spoken, modestly dressed, and deferential. Elena Rhodes wore a custom Armani suit, spoke with authority, and had the cold confidence of someone who had clawed her way up from hell. Please sit. Alexander gestured to the conference table. I understand Phoenix Rising Consulting is looking to expand into investment ventures. We are, Elena said smoothly. I've built my company on identifying and preventing corporate fraud. Now I'm interested in acquiring positions in companies that could benefit from that expertise. Alexander's smile was strained. Sterling Enterprises has always maintained the highest ethical standards. Of course, Elena replied, her tone indicating she believed otherwise. That's why the SEC investigation has been so thorough. Alexander's jaw tightened. That investigation is a misunderstanding. Disgruntled former employees making false accusations. Former employees like me, Elena thought. Like the 5 others you've destroyed since. I'm not here to judge, Elena said aloud. I'm here to make money. Your company is undervalued. With proper management and oversight, it could be profitable again. I'm prepared to invest $50 million for a 40% stake. Alexander nearly choked. 40%? That's generous, considering your position, Elena finished. And non-negotiable. I don't invest without significant control. I've learned that lesson the hard way in previous ventures. She watched him calculate. 40% would make her the largest single shareholder, but it would also save his company. His pride warred with his desperation. Desperation won. I'll need to consult with the board, Alexander said. Of course. You have 48 hours. Elena stood, gathering her briefcase. After that, I have other opportunities to pursue. The board meeting. 2 days later, Elena sat at the head of the Sterling Enterprises boardroom table, having just been approved as the company's newest major investor and board member. The other board members looked at her with a mixture of relief and wariness. Alexander sat at the opposite end of the table, his expression unreadable. Welcome to Sterling Enterprises, Ms. Rhodes, the board chairman said. We're pleased to have someone with your expertise joining us. I'm pleased to be here, Elena replied. I've made my career on finding and fixing corruption. I look forward to applying that expertise here. She opened her briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. I've already begun a preliminary audit of the company's finances. I've found several concerning patterns that I'd like to address. Alexander leaned forward. Ms. Rhodes, you've been a shareholder for less than a week. Don't you think it's premature to? No, Elena cut him off smoothly. In fact, I think 3 years late is more accurate. That's how long these discrepancies have been occurring. She distributed the documents around the table. You'll see here that there are multiple instances of funds being moved through offshore accounts, asset valuations being artificially inflated, and money disappearing into private LLCs. The board members studied the documents with growing alarm. These are serious accusations, the chairman said. They're facts, Elena corrected. And they're remarkably similar to the fraud case involving Elena Martinez 3 years ago. You all remember that case. The room fell silent. Alexander's face had gone pale. Ms. Martinez was convicted of embezzling $50 million. Elena continued, her voice steady despite the rage burning in her chest. She was sentenced to 15 years in prison. She lost everything. Her career, her reputation, her freedom. I don't see what this has to do with, Alexander began. It has everything to do with the current state of this company, Elena interrupted. Because Ms. Martinez wasn't the only person accused of fraud at Sterling Enterprises. Since then, 3 more employees have been fired and prosecuted for similar crimes. All of them had access to accounts that you personally authorized, Mr. Sterling. The board members were looking at Alexander now with dawning suspicion. Are you suggesting that I frame my own employees? Alexander demanded, his voice rising. I'm suggesting that there's a pattern, Elena said calmly. And patterns are what I investigate. I find it interesting that every person accused of fraud at this company was someone you personally trusted. Someone you gave special access to. Someone who signed documents at your request. She pulled out another file. I've been speaking with these former employees. They all tell remarkably similar stories. Stories about being asked to sign authorization forms as a favor. About being promised promotions or partnerships. About discovering too late that they were signing their own conviction. This is absurd. Alexander stood up, his chair scraping loudly. You've been here less than a week and you're making wild accusations based on experience, Elena said quietly, standing to face him across the table. You see, Mr. Sterling, I know exactly how your fraud works. Because 3 years ago, you used it on me. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Alexander froze, his eyes widening as he finally, truly looked at her. Elena, he whispered. Hello, Alexander, she said, her voice cold as winter. Surprise. I'm back from the dead. The recognition. Alexander stared at her as if seeing a ghost. That's impossible. You're in prison. You were sentenced to 15 years. I served 3. Good behavior and cooperation with federal investigators. Turns out, once I started telling them about your methods, they became very interested. Elena smiled, but there was no warmth in it. You made one mistake, Alexander. You assumed I would break. You assumed prison would destroy me. She walked slowly around the table toward him. But you forgot something. You forgot that I was the woman who worked her way up from nothing. Who put herself through school while working 2 jobs. Who learned everything about corporate finance by studying at night after managing your schedule all day. Elena stopped a few feet from him. You saw me as weak because I loved you. But love isn't weakness, Alexander. Loving you was the mistake. Surviving what you did to me. That made me stronger than you could ever imagine. Alexander's face cycled through emotions, shock, fear, anger, and finally, calculation. You can't prove anything. The case is closed. You were convicted. Of crimes you committed, Elena agreed. But here's the thing about being convicted of fraud, Alexander. It gives you a very particular education. I spent 3 years learning every detail of how you set me up. And I've spent the last 3 years gathering evidence to prove it. She turned to address the board. Ladies and gentlemen, I have documentation showing that Mr. Sterling used the exact same pattern with 7 different employees over the past 5 years. Each time, he gained their trust, had them sign documents they believed were legitimate, and then used those signatures to authorize his own fraudulent transfers. David Chen entered the boardroom, carrying several boxes of files. I have testimony from 5 former employees, all willing to testify. I have forensic accounting reports showing how the money actually moved. And I have communications from a source inside the SEC investigation indicating that they've been building a case against Mr. Sterling for the past 18 months. Alexander's face had gone from pale to red. You planted evidence. You're bitter and vindictive, and you're fabricating. I fabricated nothing, Elena said. You did this to yourself. Every fraudulent transfer, every offshore account, every forged authorization, it's all real. I just followed the money trail you left behind. The evidence unveiled. Elena opened her briefcase and pulled out a small device. Do you remember telling me that you documented my delusions about our relationship? That you had recordings of me making disturbing claims? Alexander's eyes widened. Turns out, I'm good at hiding recording devices too. I've been wearing one every single day since I came back to New York. Elena pressed play. Alexander's voice filled the boardroom, speaking to Rebecca, his current wife, in what he thought was a private conversation Elena had secretly recorded at a company event the previous week. The Rhodes woman is smarter than I expected, Alexander's recorded voice said. But she doesn't know about the Santiago account. As long as that stays hidden, we're fine. If the SEC finds it, it's over. Rebecca's voice responded. What about the Martinez woman? Do you think she'll ever? Elena? Please. She's rotting in prison, and even if she got out, she's broken. I destroyed her completely. She was so easy to manipulate, so pathetically in love. The recording continued, with Alexander describing in detail how he had framed Elena, how he had seduced her specifically because she seemed weak and controllable, how he had planned every step of her destruction. The board members sat in stunned silence as Alexander's own words condemned him. When the recording ended, Elena smiled at Alexander's ashen face. I learned something in prison, Alexander. Always get evidence. Always have proof. Never trust anyone to believe your word alone. She turned to the board chairman. I'm filing this recording with the SEC tomorrow, along with the forensic evidence David has compiled. But first, I'm exercising my rights as a 40% shareholder to call for an emergency vote. A vote on what? The chairman asked weakly. A vote of no confidence in Alexander Sterling as CEO. I nominate myself as interim CEO until this investigation is resolved and the company can be properly restructured. The vote. The vote was swift. With the recording as evidence, the board had no choice. Alexander Sterling was removed as CEO by a vote of 8-1, the only vote in his favor being his own. As security escorted him from the building, Alexander stopped in front of Elena. You'll regret this, he hissed. I'll fight you in court. You'll lose, Elena interrupted. Because unlike you, I have the truth on my side. And unlike the woman you destroyed 3 years ago, I'm not alone anymore. I have evidence, I have allies, and I have something you'll never understand. What's that? A reason to fight that's bigger than greed. Elena thought of Sophia, waiting at home with Maria. You destroyed me for money and power. I'm destroying you for justice. And for every person you've ever hurt. As Alexander was led away, David approached Elena. That was incredible. You did it. Not yet, Elena said, watching through the window as Alexander was escorted to a police car. The SEC had moved fast with her evidence. This is just the beginning. The truth about Sophia. That evening, Elena sat in Sophia's room, watching her daughter sleep. The little girl clutched her favorite stuffed phoenix, a gift Elena had given her when she finally came home from prison. You did it, Mommy, Maria whispered from the doorway. Elena nodded. The first phase, yes. He's been arrested. The SEC has everything they need. His assets are being frozen. Sterling Enterprises is mine to rebuild. Maria came to sit beside her. And what about telling him? About Sophia? Elena looked at her daughter, so innocent and pure. I don't know. He doesn't deserve to know her. But she might deserve to know the truth about him someday. Children need to know where they come from, Maria said gently. Even if where they come from is painful. He'll use her, Elena said, fear creeping into her voice for the first time that day. If he knows about her, he'll try to use her against me. He'll fight for custody just to hurt me. He's going to prison, Elena. By the time he gets out, Sophia will be grown. You'll have time to decide what to tell her and when. Elena hoped Maria was right. But she knew Alexander Sterling. He was a survivor, a manipulator, and even from prison, he might find ways to cause harm. For now, though, she had won. The man who destroyed her life was facing justice. The company he had built on lies was hers to transform. And her daughter was safe, loved, and would grow up knowing that her mother never gave up, never surrendered, and turned her greatest defeat into her ultimate victory. Elena kissed Sophia's forehead and whispered, I did this for you, my love. So you would grow up in a world where people like your father can't destroy innocent people without consequences. So you would know that even when you fall, you can rise again. Sophia stirred in her sleep, smiling at some happy dream. Elena smiled too, though her eyes were hard. The phoenix had risen from the ashes, but the fire that forged her was far from extinguished. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Tomorrow, she would start rebuilding Sterling Enterprises into something honorable. Tomorrow, she would ensure that Alexander Sterling faced every consequence of his crimes. But tonight, Elena Martinez, no, Elena Rhodes, the woman who had died in disgrace and been reborn in determination, simply sat with her daughter and savored the victory she had spent 3 years planning. The game wasn't over. There would be trials, legal battles, and challenges ahead. But Elena had already won the most important battle, the battle for her soul. She had survived. She had risen. And she had proven that revenge, when served with patience, precision, and justice, was indeed a dish best served cold. The courtroom showdown. 6 months after Elena took control of Sterling Enterprises, she stood outside the federal courthouse, cameras flashing as reporters shouted questions. She wore a Navy power suit, her hair pulled back in a sophisticated twist, and her expression was calm and confident. "Ms. Rhodes, how do you feel about today's trial? Ms. Rhodes, will you testify against Alexander Sterling? Ms. Rhodes, is it true you were engaged to the defendant?" Elena raised her hand for silence. "I will let the evidence speak for itself. Today is about justice, not just for me, but for the 7 other employees Alexander Sterling framed and destroyed. Today is about ensuring that powerful people cannot abuse their positions without consequences." Inside the courtroom, Elena took her seat in the front row. Across the aisle, Alexander sat with his team of expensive lawyers. He looked thinner, his suit hanging loose on his frame. Prison had not been kind to him during the months he'd spent awaiting trial. When their eyes met, Elena saw something she hadn't expected: genuine fear. "Good," she thought coldly. "Now you know how it feels." The prosecution's case was devastating. David Chin testified about the forensic accounting evidence, tracing every fraudulent transfer back to Alexander's personal accounts. 5 former employees testified about how Alexander had manipulated them, earned their trust, and then destroyed their lives. Then it was Elena's turn.